Okay, in this video, we are going to talk about how to solve a quadratic equation by applying the quadratic formula. So the quadratic formula, right, was we went through the kind of the derivation of it in the earlier video, but essentially it's created by a process called completing the square with the general form. And we take the general form for any quadratic. Remember, quadratic is a degree of 2. It can have any a, b, and c value, and those coefficients, right, if we solve for x, are what we take and put into the quadratic formula to solve. So the first thing you want to make sure that you do when you're going to use the formula that I'm going to write out in just a second is make sure that the equation is set equal to 0. If it's not in standard form and you identify an a, b, and c value, and it's not equal to 0, then this, whatever's over here, probably should be added or subtracted to this side, right? It's going to affect those a, b, and c values. So make sure everything is on one side. Then you're going to identify a, b, and c. Remember, a is the coefficient to the squared variable, b is the coefficient of the variable in the middle, and c is the constant number, so it's not attached to a variable. Then what we're going to do is we're going to plug those numbers or the coefficients into the quadratic formula, and then we simplify, simplify, simplify. So the formula is already technically solved for x. We just need to simplify as much as possible to write our answer. We always simplify the radical part first, and then if the three coefficients can simplify, we will simplify those. So I'm going to go through, I'm going to write down the formula here. The formula, quadratic formula, is x is equal to, we go negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times the a value times the c value all over 2 times the a value. Okay, I'm attaching a video below of a dancing little weasel. It's going to sing a little song that's going to help you, so that as you go through this, watch that video a bunch of times. Music helps us to memorize things. So you've got x equals, they'll sing you a song, negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So you're going to need that as you're working forward. So we want to look at this formula. Before I just identify my own a, b, and c and go ahead and plug it in, we're going to practice simplifying first. So once you've plugged it into the formula, it's going to look something like this. Notice everywhere we input a variable, we were putting parentheses around it just to make sure that we are putting that in correctly. So if this is what we're looking at, we've got negative 8 plus or minus 8 squared minus 4 times 4, right, times negative 22. All over 2 times 4. So let's simplify that just a little bit. Again, we always start by simplifying the inside of the radical first. So if we simplify this, I'm going to write this over here, we get negative 8 plus or minus the square root. I'm going to simplify all of that inside, and then on the bottom I have 2 times 4 is 8. Now there's 3 terms involved here. There's the one on the bottom, well technically 2, but there's 2 terms on top. And we have to make sure you can't just cross this out, right? Because there's a whole nother term right here, and unless his coefficient also simplifies, we can't just cancel things out. So we've got to simplify the radical, and then if there's a coefficient between all 3 pieces that's common, then we can simplify that like a fraction. Oops, sorry. So again, what we're going to do is the radical piece often, if you put this whole radical in and then everything on the inside, it will give you a decimal. So I'm just going to put this inside part into my calculator. So you'll notice I'm going to input it, I'm going to pull up the calculator app, in the same way that I see it right there. So in the calculator, let's jump in here. I'm going to clear this out. So we're going to put parentheses, just like we saw. We're going to put 8 parentheses squared minus 4 parentheses negative 22. Then we push enter. It's 416. So when I come over here, I am going to put 416 into that radical. Now 416, I don't think it has a nice square root, so we're going to build a factor tree, and again we're simplifying like we've been practicing. So you can divide that by whatever you'd like. That would be maybe 16 and 26. That would be 4 and 4. That's perfect. There's a group of 4s. 16 would be 2, or I apologize, 26 is 2 and 13. So 2 and 13, no groups there. But if we're rewriting this, we've now got -8, right? That didn't change. The 8 on the bottom didn't change, the plus or minus, but this 4 is going to sneak out in front of the radical. So we get 4 square root of, and this 2 and 13 go back in to create the 26. Now again, you're almost done. You've simplified, but we do look at these 3 coefficients and we say, is there anything common that divides out of those 3? All of those values are divisible by 4. 4 goes into -8 twice, goes into 4 once, goes into 8 twice. So our final simplified solution would be -2 plus or minus the square root of 26. You can write that 1 if you'd like to, all over 2. Again, it's important to note that we can't simplify a whole value or this coefficient value, so to speak, into the radical, right? We've simplified the radical as much as possible, and only things with groups can come out of that radical. All right, let's look at one more. On this next one, again, we've got -11 plus or minus the square root, and this is all over 8. So once again, in my calculator, I'm going to input just this part that's underneath the radical. So we've got 11, I should use parentheses so we get used to it, 11 squared. Then we end up with -4 times 4, and -69. Oh dear, I've got lots of things going on here. And then we push enter. So this one is 1225. Now 1225 is a really big number, right? So if I look at it, sometimes I'll just check to see if it has a square root. Notice if I do the square root of 1225, this one actually comes out as 35. It's a whole number. So again, you could, you could break that down into a factor tree, but it will end up being like 35 times 35. So that's awesome. That means we have -11 plus or minus 35 all over 8. So we don't have any radicals left. If you don't have any radicals left, that means that we can simplify this down to its fractional or whole number or integer values. So here, again, remember that plus or minus means it represents 2 solutions. This is either -11 plus 35 over 8, in which case if I simplify that, I get 24 over 8, or 24 divided by 8 would be 3. So 3 is one of those solutions. Or we use the subtraction sign in front of the 35. So -11 minus 35 over 8 would give me a -46 over 8. If I divide each of those pieces by 2, I get -23 over 4. And you can write it as a decimal as long as it ends nicely. So that's how we simplify. Again, so now if I wanted to solve a quadratic equation, I'm going to jump back here on the next page. And we need to identify the a, b, and c and go ahead and plug it in. I'm going to write the formula off here again so we have it one more time. So again, x is equal to -b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So there's our equation. And again, in order to identify the a, b, and c, we need it to be equal to 0. So we're going to move everything to one side. So we have 5n squared. You're going to subtract that 9n over. You're going to subtract the 116 over so that it's equal to 0. Once we have that, we can identify our a value as 5, our b value as -9, and our c value as -116. From there, we can go ahead and plug it into the quadratic formula. Oh, we're not using x this time. I apologize. The variable is an n. So we do -b, or in other words, opposite of b. If I do -9, right, a -9 is a +9, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so our b value is -9, minus 4 times a times c, and again, if you'll just use those parentheses and then put your a value in there, and your c value in there, all over 2a. From there, it looks like the ones we were just practicing simplifying. So we're going to go equals 9 plus or minus. We've got a 10 on the bottom. So again, I take this top part and I plug it into the calculator. So I really want you to practice, again, that -9 squared. I just want to show you, you need to make sure that you put -9 inside of the parentheses and square it so that it will give you the correct value. So we're going -4, A, and C was -116. So we get 2401. Now that's another big number, so I'm just going to check to see if it has a nice whole number square root. And it looks like it's 49. So we come over here. This was 2401. It's square root, right? Or 49. So this is really just 9 plus or minus 49 over 10. Now again, there's no radicals left in this, so we're going to simplify all the way. We're going to go 9 plus 49 over 10. So in this case, we're going to get 58 over 10. If I divide both of those pieces by 2, we get 29 over 5. Or we use the negative, so 9 minus 49 over 10, we get -40 over 10, which is equal to -4. Awesome. So all of these, we could use the quadratic formula to solve. I'm going to jump down and just try another one down here near the bottom. If you have an equation that looks like this, you could try either method. So you can either subtract the 5 to both sides and solve with square roots, or again, you could use the quadratic formula. Just recognize your A is equal to 6, B is 0 because it's missing, and C is equal to the 5. So we could use that either way. Again, I'm going to jump down here to number 6. So on this one again, before I identify my A, B, and C, I want to make sure that all terms are on one side. So I'm going to subtract the 14 over. Once I have that over there, I can identify that my A value would be a +4. My B value would be a -11. C would be a -14. So once we have that, we go ahead and say n is equal to -b. So again, b over here is a -11. So I do the opposite of that. So we go 11 plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times the a value times the c value. So we've got 4 and -14 all over 2a. So if we start to simplify that, we've got a square root here and we've got 8 on the bottom. So again, go ahead and plug that into your calculator. You're going to have the -11, and then again make sure that negative is in the parentheses, -4 times -14. So we're going to get 345 in here. So 345, we can see if that breaks down. It looks like it's going to break down by 5 and maybe 69. So we keep breaking that down. This ends up being 3 and 23. 23 won't break down anymore. So notice we've got 5, 3, and 23. There's no groups there. Nothing else simplifies. So this one's completely done. 345 over 8. And we have solved this equation. So the quadratic formula, it's very repetitive. Once you have it memorized, you're just inputting values and simplifying. But it's also very easy to make mistakes with your negatives. So make sure you're walking yourself through those steps. Set it equal to 0. Identify your A, B, and C. Making sure that we do the opposite of B. So if this is negative, we put in a +11. And again, making sure that these values are in there correctly when you input them into the calculator. Other than that, you can use the quadratic formula at any time. So if it's factorable, it's probably faster to factor. But if you can't tell that it's factorable right off, go ahead and plug it into the quadratic formula. Again, you can listen to that quadratic formula song over and over until you feel like you